So I'm a little late to this, but I finally got around to checking out Netflix's Dahmer series. And I have to be honest with you, it was unlike anything that I expected. Let's discuss.
I watch so you don't have to.
Before I get started, I'd like to kindly ask that you hit the like button, and please subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.
What are you waiting for, huh? What are you waiting for?
So as I began to dive into this series, I couldn't help but think about David Fincher's Zodiac at least a handful of times, which to me is a masterpiece that doesn't get enough credit. And I believe that movie to be the pinnacle of real-life serial killer dramatization and storytelling. One thing that movie does really well is show how the Zodiac's rampage impacted everything from law enforcement to the media to society as a whole.
Just a sick world we're living in, sick people.
But even as perfect as that film is, it doesn't really show how the serial killer's actions impacted the victims or the victims' families. At least not in great detail. In fact, this is a problem with a lot of serial killer-driven content, either fictional stories or non-fiction stories. The victims are usually portrayed as a footnote in a much larger story that is focused squarely on the killer himself or herself. And what Dahmer did that was really refreshing to me is that it used a sizable chunk of the series' runtime to showcasing some of the victims and their stories.
You had my curiosity. Now you have my attention.
In fact, one of the best episodes in this entire series featured Dahmer himself in more of a supporting role. I believe it was episode 6 titled Silence. This episode was about Tony Hughes, a deaf man that would later become one of Dahmer's most tragic victims. And they spend almost an entire episode showing Tony interacting with his family and friends and attempting to live out his dreams of becoming a model. He's just portrayed as being such a genuine and likable person. So much so that in the series, even Dahmer himself has difficulty going through with his usual routine when he's planning on killing someone. But the way that the episode kind of paid homage to Tony, it made his eventual murder hit that much harder. I remember thinking to myself while watching it, this has to be one of the victims that got away, right? No way they're gonna spend this much time with this person, only to have him killed brutally by Jeffrey Dahmer. To me, that didn't line up with the typical way that stories like these are told.
Yeah, you know what? You thought wrong.
In reality, that's exactly what happens. And when he kills Tony, it just makes Dahmer look like that much more of a monster. And it really drives home how tragic these murders actually were. I know there was some controversy around this show coming from the families of the victims, which I totally understand and respect. I can't imagine seeing one of the most horrific moments in your life reenacted for a TV series just so people can consume it as entertainment. And it is a double-edged sword in that aspect when covering topics like this. But in my opinion, it did feel like the creators of Dahmer did at least try to be as respectful to the victims as possible. And again, that was very refreshing to me and something that I wasn't expecting. As for Dahmer himself, we do get a look into his backstory. With everything from his troubled childhood to his addiction problems later in life taking center stage in his development.
You one crazy ass bitch!
The one thing they do, however, is not try to give us a reason for why he is the way that he is. They put forth theories, but they don't really give you a definitive answer. And honestly, I think that was the best possible way to go. By giving a definitive reason, it would almost be creating an excuse for his actions, and nobody wants that. In reality, some people are just born evil, and that's kind of what it's left at. And honestly, it makes his character even that much more frightening.
You know, I just do things.
Even later in life, when Jeff is trying to make amends for the things that he did, it's done in a way that makes it feel very disingenuous, because it probably was. When you do the things that he does, it's difficult for anyone to see him as being capable of change, or feeling that he is deserving of any level of forgiveness. And to me, even when they do make him look somewhat sympathetic, in the end, it's all still pretty much chalked up to him being an evil person to his core.
Purely and simply evil.
While I'm on the subject, I know this has been said probably a million times, but Evan Peters deserves all the praise in the world for his performance. This is an absolute dynamite, once-in-a-lifetime portrayal, in my opinion. I find that Evan Peters has a knack for being the best part of any production he's involved with. Even the not-so-good productions. X-Men Apocalypse, I'm looking at you.
You didn't see that coming.
But he really does nail it. Everything from the mannerisms, to his body movement and posture, to his speech patterns. He embodied Jeffrey Dahmer in every sense of the word, and as scary as it is to think about him going to those lengths, you have to admire his commitment to it, because you literally can't take your eyes off of him anytime he's on screen. I was particularly impressed in scenes where you see him turn from being this mild-mannered, awkward guy to being completely enraged just at the thought of someone leaving him or him being left alone. It really is an almost instant, terrifying transformation.
He's cold. This is just really embarrassing.
In fact, there's a lot of standout performances in this series. Richard Jenkins as Jeffrey's father, who plays a character that was loyal to his son to a fault. And Niecy Nash was really great as Jeff's neighbor. I don't think she gets enough credit either for how well she portrays someone who was affected by being so close to all the horrific things that were happening in Jeff's life. Things that were happening just a few feet away from her. She really is the glue that kind of holds this story together. In a lot of ways, she's our window into this story, but she also doesn't have as much knowledge as the viewer does. So you can imagine her horror when all of her suspicions are eventually confirmed. This show also tackles the incompetence of the police when dealing with this situation, which again makes the entire chain of events even that much more tragic. On more than one occasion, they could have prevented a lot of people from dying.
Put some effort into it!
But Jeff was such an unthreatening guy on the surface, and he was operating in areas with minimal police activity, so he basically just got away with murder for so long, because no one, except his neighbor, believed that he could be capable of such things. When you think about it, it would be hard for anyone to believe that a person could be capable of what he did. But in the end, a lot of people were ignoring the warning signs, and it cost a lot of people their lives. This show is also strangely disturbing, yet most of the brutality happens off screen, which I happen to think was a great creative choice, because this show is the perfect example of less is more. I don't need to see him cutting bodies up. I don't need to see him giving someone a homemade lobotomy. Sometimes just showing us everything leading up to these events and then showing us the aftermath is enough, because it leaves a lot to the viewer's imagination, which is the most effective thing that a horror storyteller can do.
I like it a lot.
Not to say there's no graphic brutality throughout the entire series, it's just scattered throughout rather than hitting you with this constant barrage of blood and guts. Because if they did that, that wouldn't have been as effective to me. It's all about the tension and atmosphere, and to me, that's what makes Dahmer creepy, and that's what makes this adaptation stand out.
That makes sense.
Another interesting thing they do is use non-linear storytelling, which is great when it's done right. The show begins where a lot of storytellers might have chose to end it. And then once we get back to that point narratively, we go beyond that ending. So in a lot of ways, they're giving you a lot more to this story than you might be expecting. My only real criticism is that later in the series, in later episodes, it does start to feel like they're trying to show you too much, and it starts to disrupt the flow of the show a little bit. Like they just suddenly add these random characters who do hold some significance to the story. But because we never saw them before up until that point, it does feel a bit jarring. And it does give some of the later episodes a bit of a weird pace. It almost feels like they were putting a little bit of filler just so they could stretch it to 10 episodes. Like the random lawyer buying all of Jeffrey's belongings and then burying them. I understand why it's included, but it really wasn't necessary.
Don't waste my time!
Overall, I have to say, I was blown away by Dahmer. I was very much looking forward to watching it, so I went in with pretty high expectations. And in a rare instance, the show still managed to exceed those expectations. And the fact that it's on Netflix makes it all the more shocking, because a lot of their more recent content has been really forgettable to me. But I have to give them credit when they deserve it. It features brilliant performances and an unconventional approach to storytelling, great atmosphere and tension. It manages to find a balance between being very disturbing, as it should be, while also being respectful to the victims as much as possible. I would highly recommend you watching Dahmer if you haven't already, especially if you're into true crime stories like I am. It's a story like this done in a way that we've never seen it done before, and that's why I'm going to give it the Pleased Palpatine.
Good.
Y'all be cool. Right on.